I'm so excited that the K-State first book of the 2023 to 24 school year will be George Takei's graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy. This intimate memoir teaches readers about the harrowing experience of the World War II Japanese incarceration camps. Told through the eyes of a young Takei, the confusion, fear, and pain of the Takei family is palpable as soldiers escort their family from their home in Los Angeles at gunpoint in the beginning of the book. As we read this memoir, I think it's important to know that this wasn't the first time that the United States had targeted Japanese Americans. The United States has a troubling history when it comes to the civil liberties of marginalized groups, and in this case, Asian Americans. I'm interested in the legal structures that upheld and perpetuated racism towards Asian Americans. In this video, I will be taking a closer look at 4 landmark Supreme Court cases that impacted Asian American people. These 4 cases are Ozawa v. United States, Thind v. United States, Korematsu v. United States, and Hirabayashi v. United States. Noticing a pattern here? In 1922, the Supreme Court, with a unanimous decision, held that white persons meant only those of the Caucasian race, which meant that Takao Ozawa was not eligible for citizenship. Ozawa was a landmark immigration case that highlighted the arbitrary requirements for citizenship that were placed to keep people of color out. At the time, U.S. immigration law only permitted free white persons and persons of African descent to become naturalized citizens. Ozawa had lived in the U.S. for over 20 years and argued that, under the law, he should be considered white. The Supreme Court's decision in Ozawa established a legal precedent that free white persons' naturalization did not include people of Asian descent. It also reinforced racial barriers and reinforced the idea that American citizenship was only for white people. A year later, in 1923, Bhagat Singh Thind's case against the U.S. made it to the Supreme Court in Thind v. United States. Thind was an Indian immigrant who had served in World War I and wanted to become a naturalized citizen. Thind argued that since he was of Aryan descent, he had a right to citizenship through naturalization. In another unanimous decision, the court held that Thind did not qualify as white as the law understood it. Because Thind did not possess typically Aryan features, fair skin, light eyes, a narrow nose, he would not qualify as the white race. Although Thind wasn't of Japanese descent, he was of Asian descent, and this ruling established a legal precedent in which race wasn't just determined by ancestry, it was also determined by looks. Thind v. United States reinforced that racial exclusion of Asian Americans and contributed to the legal structure for racial discrimination in the U.S. This case solidified that it was not just about excluding Japanese Americans from citizenship, it was about protecting the concept of whiteness as the court saw it. Thind v. United States also showcased how contradictory and inconsistent race-based policies and laws were in the United States. Takei's memoir begins with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The United States took the bombing as an opportunity to punish Japanese Americans for their lack of whiteness. In February of 1942, just 2 short months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and amid World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. Executive Order 9066 authorized military commanders to declare military zones, which prohibited any persons who were deemed a threat to the American war effort to be. This resulted in the incarceration of approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans, 2/3 of which had U.S. citizenship. This order was justified due to the concern for national security and the threat of espionage by Japanese Americans, but it was racism and anti-Japanese sentiment that was behind the creation of this order. Also issued in 1942, trailing the Executive Order 9066 by 3 months, was Civilian Exclusion Order 34, which ordered the forced removal of all persons of Japanese descent from Bainbridge Island, located in Washington, to incarceration camps. This order served as the model for the other 107 civilian exclusion orders issued along the West Coast. Amidst the thousands of Japanese Americans being forced from their homes, some Japanese American citizens ignored the unconstitutional order and remained in place. Of those citizens was Gordon Hirabayashi. In 1943, as a student of the University of Washington, Hirabayashi was convicted of violating a relocation order when he was caught out past curfew. He challenged this conviction because his constitutional rights had been violated. But in a unanimous decision, the court ruled that the government's actions were justified due to the ongoing war with Japan. This decision was a disgusting violation of civil liberties and established a dangerous precedent that national security was more important than individual rights. The fourth and final case I'll discuss is Korematsu v. United States. Red Korematsu was an American citizen of Japanese descent who refused to evacuate and was arrested for his noncompliance. In the Supreme Court case, Korematsu v. United States, Korematsu challenged his arrest, arguing that under the Constitution's Equal Protection Act, his rights had been violated. In a 6-3 ruling, the court upheld Korematsu's conviction, noting the government's actions were constitutional and that there was a necessity to protect against Japanese espionage during the war. The court ruling solidified the precedent that Hirabayashi set and enshrined the racist legislature as constitutional. These 4 landmark Supreme Court cases highlight the racial targeting of Asian Americans by the legal system in the United States. The legal system has been used to defend and perpetuate racial inequality. In Ozawa and Thind, the government made it clear that citizenship was for white people who were white-presenting. In Hirabayashi and Korematsu, the government demonstrated that civil liberties of citizens were only for the white citizens. As we reflect on the discriminatory legislature, take a moment to reflect on what it means to be an American citizen. George Takei's father had faith in his country and its people, even in the face of great suffering. Quote, "He told me that our democracy is a people's democracy, and that can be as great as the people can be, but it is also as fallible as the people are." End quote, Takei's father told him. He died in 1979, 9 years before the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was passed by President Reagan, which offered an apology along with $20,000, which is $40,000 in today's money. We are just 80 years away from these devastating racist legislature, and it's important to note that our legal system still discriminates against marginalized groups. I'm